What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, I'll be giving you my full review on the Samsung Galaxy A21. Now, if you read the title and assumed I'm here to clickbait you or prolong the video for no reason, don't worry. I'm gonna get into the problem with this phone in like 30 seconds. Let me just finish up the intro here and we'll get right into it. In general, I think the A21 is a solid phone. It's going to be one of the most widely available budget devices here in the US, with countless wireless networks and prepaid carriers starting to offer it. And I fully expect a lot of people to buy it. And if you're interested in the A21, you should buy it, especially since it's going to be offered with discounts and deals. Even at its full retail price for around $200 right now, that's still a good buy. And if you guys are interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own, or maybe want to pick up this phone for yourself, I'll have some links down below in the video description to where you can get this phone at its cheapest current prices. So check down there so you don't miss out on any good deals. Now, the thing about the A21 is this. While it's a good phone on its own, I don't think it's as stellar of a device as the A20 was last year, for one reason in particular: the display. Last year's A20 shipped with a beautiful Super AMOLED screen. Sure, it was a 1560 by 720 resolution panel, but I'll still take that since it was a bright, bold, colorful OLED screen. This year, the new A21 got an IPS LCD screen at basically the same resolution, 1600 by 720. Not only did the A21 drop the AMOLED screen, it didn't even get a bump up in resolution. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's a little insulting that Samsung pushed out this new phone with, in my opinion, a worse display than last year's model. I truly believe the AMOLED screen on last year's A20 was one of the main reasons why that phone was so popular to begin with. It was a huge selling point on a really reasonably priced device. This year, Samsung basically took a step back, and they kind of broke one of the cardinal rules of business. Don't start charging people money for something they already had. Now, if you want to get an AMOLED screen, you have to jump up to the A31, a higher priced, different tier phone. The A21's display on its own is fine. At 6.5 inches, it's a huge panel, and for a lot of folks, getting a screen size that big is great. It's an awesome viewing experience, you've got a lot of real estate to work with, and in general, there's nothing wrong with the LCD panel itself. If you aren't coming from an A20, you won't have any complaints. But if you are coming from an A20, and this is sort of the whole point, it's a downgrade. And frankly, it's one big reason to not upgrade to the A21 this year. That's really tough for me to say because every other new A series phone this year was actually a decent upgrade from the previous year's model, but not in this case. Now, the rest of the phone does have plenty that's changed. New specs, new cameras, and a few other things that I'll mention, so that's good at least. But it's just tough for me to get over that screen. It's disappointing, and it kind of kills a lot of the value that this A series phone had. And by the way, this does sort of mean that last year's A20 is an even better buy this year. This is an instance where going with last year's phone might mean you're actually getting more. So now you know my biggest gripe. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below too, so let me know what you think. In the meantime, let's go ahead and talk about everything else that's going on with this phone. Physically, the A21 is basically on par with the rest of Samsung's budget and mid-range lineup. And that's to say that it's an all plastic build, though the one color choice, all black, isn't as flashy or as colorful as the shiny rainbow finish from some other phones, but there's nothing wrong with simplicity. The build is fine. Samsung has pretty much mastered utilizing plastic while still ensuring the phone doesn't feel cheap. And the biggest consideration with this device really just has to do with its size. Like I mentioned already, at 6.5 inches, this is a big phone. It's actually the biggest in the entire A series lineup just by sheer body size. It's a slim, tall phone with that 20:9 aspect ratio, which means it's a bit of a stretch to reach every corner. It won't fit everyone's fingers, but at the same time, getting a huge screen anyway for this price is probably going to be a positive for most people. This year, Samsung moved the camera cutout to the corner with their Infinity O setup and kept a big bottom chin down below. Not the best in terms of maximizing space, but overall the phone does look modern while still referencing the fact that it is a budget device. Taking a look around at everything else, the A21 isn't missing anything important, which is great. We've got expandable storage via a micro SD card slot on the side, the same familiar button placement. Down below there's the headphone jack, USB-C charging port, and single speaker, which is good enough. It sounds the same as about any other single speaker setup. And across the back, there's obviously a bunch of camera lenses, which I'll get into in a second, as well as the physical fingerprint sensor. You guys know with phones at this price point, I like the rear-mounted fingerprint sensor. It's simple, it's fast, it's easy to find, and most importantly, secure. And for budget phones like this one, there's just no need to move to an in-display reader. The A21 also utilizes Face Unlock too, which works fine. I tend to pair up both unlocking methods when I use this phone, and I quickly get into the device one way or another. There's no issues here. Now, when it does come to specs and performance, this is actually where a lot of people sort of criticized the A21. They weren't really happy with what's inside with this phone. But honestly, in my experience, I found the phone performs better than I expected. The A21 is actually powered by the MediaTek Helio P35 processor, 3 GB of RAM, and 32 GB of built-in storage, with, like I said, the option to add an SD card for more. Now, here are the Geekbench and Antutu benchmark scores, so you can get an idea of what we're working with, but in real-world use, the A21 is a solid device. A year or two ago, going with a MediaTek processor, especially in the Samsung space, was kind of unheard of, and likely would have been a bad choice. These chipsets had not so good of a reputation. This year, though, in a bunch of 2020 phones, actually, the MediaTek processors have performed a lot better, and I'd go as far as to say that any criticism you might have had for them isn't as warranted nowadays. This is a phone that for most everyday tasks feels fast, and I'd argue the truly limiting factor isn't the processor itself, more the RAM options that you get. 3 gigs I don't think is enough nowadays. 4 should be the minimum, with the option to go beyond that if you want to pay more, but it's a bummer because there's no other configuration options to choose from. You can't pay any extra to get any more. And you notice the low RAM when you start to flip back and forth in the apps. Things just aren't running in the background. Nothing stays current, really. Everything always has to be reloaded. And you also feel that RAM limitations when gaming. Not as much in-game, I'll get to that in a second, but mostly when you first launch these graphics-heavy apps. They take a minute or two to get to the main screen, which isn't ideal. You certainly need to have a little bit of patience, but once you're finally in, you do get a pretty good gaming experience. Sure, there's a frame drop from time to time, but everything is very playable. This is a phone you can confidently game with and enjoy pretty much any titles you want, and that's awesome for a device at this price point. In my time using the phone, there wasn't anything this phone couldn't handle, but I will say this: in 2020, you can get a lot of phone for not a lot of money, and if you're the kind of person who pushes their device kind of hard or expects a lot out of it in day-to-day use, you may actually be better off jumping up to the A31 or even the A21s, where you can get a slightly better processor and a bunch more RAM. Even a couple-year-old flagship device might be a better option for you. Just evaluate your phone usage and daily needs and decide from there. For most people, the A21 is going to be more than fine, but for a certain group of power users who need more each day out of their phone, there are better options out there. Now, actually, one thing this phone does quite well is last throughout the day. The A21 packs a good-sized 4,000 milliamp battery, and paired with a less power-hungry screen and more budget-friendly specs, you can get a lot of life out of this thing, beyond a day's use under normal circumstances. I think that's expected with a phone like this. Most phones in this price range usually do offer solid battery life, and the A21 is no exception. Paired with a 15-watt fast charger too, you can quickly charge up this phone as well, but in my time using this the past couple of weeks, I had no complaints with longevity. Finally, let's talk about those camera lenses, and fortunately, unlike the screen, Samsung actually spent a lot of time and attention bringing some good upgrades here. The A21 now offers a quad lens setup, and you get everything you need: a 16 megapixel megapixel main lens, 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro, and 2 megapixel depth sensor. With the software features, there's not a ton that's missing. There's no night mode, unfortunately, but beyond that, there's still plenty to work with. Obviously, you can utilize that wide angle, which I do use pretty often. The macro lens isn't terribly useful, but it's there at least. The depth sensor helps. You've got HDR, panorama, a few other little additions, and 1080p video, and the real-world results look pretty good. You do miss out on some detail. You don't have that crazy high megapixel count that some of the other A-series phones do have, but in general, there's nothing wrong with the pictures. Even the selfies look pretty good actually with the 13 megapixel front camera, and over the last year especially, I totally recognize how much effort Samsung has put into their cameras on these budget and mid-range phones. Not too long ago, these $200 devices had just awful single lens camera setups that no one wanted to use, and now they are suddenly very respectable setups with a lot of potential. You can still do better though, like I said. Another $50 to $100 might get you the A21s or A31, and that could be worth it if you truly value your pictures and videos, but what you end up getting with the A21 on its own is still plenty in my opinion. So here are my final thoughts on the A21. Unfortunately, if you're coming from last year's A20, I don't necessarily think you should jump into the A21. While you do get some upgrades, the thing you look at most, the display, got worse, and that's a huge bummer. If you're coming from any other device, I do think the A21 is a decent phone. It obviously has a lot to offer, and considering how widely available it's going to be, and the kinds of deals you'll likely be able to get on it, it's certainly worth considering. But like I said, if the screen is the thing that's most important to you, maybe look into the A20 as well. That's still a good buy, and I might just end up sticking with it, all things considered. So there you go, that's what I think about the new Samsung Galaxy A21. What do you guys think? Is this phone worth getting, or would you just prefer something else? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter, and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.